So in this segment, we're going to be talking about this self-owning article from the Telegraph, which is genuinely funny. Like, there are two major self-owns in this article. If I had written this and submitted this to in university or to an editor, I would be embarrassed. I would be so embarrassed. That's how bad this is. Right. No idea what to title this video. It's that bad. So you've got Carolyn Jones, who's done nothing wrong. She's not one of the clowns in this one. She imports 6 to 10 electrostimulators for denerved muscles every year. So that's for people. This is for people with spinal problems. The specialist kit from Germany and Austria, so EU countries, artificially stimulates the muscles of patients with spinal cord damage, helping them stay strong and staving off further problems such as ulceration, I think that is. And so point being is that she imports these goods from the EU. They have to have the CE mark, and this is where we run into our first self-own. So her suppliers are under threat from a change in rules. This is a change in rule the UK is making, not the EU. The product comes with a CE mark, allowing it to be sold in the EU and the US, so it's a regulatory stamp of approval, essentially. But from January, the UK is imposing its post-Brexit UKCA mark. So that means that these products have to go through a UK-specific regulator in order to be approved in the UK. And considering she only buys 6 to 10 of these a year, there might be other people in the country buying these, but her being a small purchaser, how expensive is it going to be for these companies in Austria and Germany to get it past the regulator in the UK when they're not selling much of these? Is it worth their time? No. If they, the suppliers, have to re-register for another set of regulations for a company they only sell 6 to, when they can cover the US and Europe under one label, I can well imagine them asking, is it worth the effort? Which is a great question. Why is it that this CE mark is good enough for the Americans and the EU member states, but not good enough for us? This is one of those. This is Brexit bureaucracy right here, that we're putting another regulatory hurdle in the way, and to stifle businesses in the UK, because to export into the UK, you're going to need this UKCA mark, right? That's going to affect business manufacturers all around the world, because they're going to have to go through another regulator now to export their products to the UK. And let's be real here, the EU and the US are huge markets compared to the UK. How many of these companies are going to bother going through the effort of getting this UKCA mark? It's ridiculous. That's why you've got stories coming out of us unequivocally giving equivalency to other countries and states. Or the EU sort of supranational organisations, I think the phrase is. I can't remember the exact thing you would call the EU. But the idea is we would give them equivalency with us, so they wouldn't need a UKCA mark. That's why they've touted that idea. MOG has pushed that idea. Because the simple fact is, if it's going to cost them a lot of money, thousands or however much to get it regulated in the UK, they're either going to stop selling here, which would be a disaster for this person, or they're going to just pass it on to her as the consumer, which they will do, and it's going to make her costs go up massively. So these people with these health issues will have to potentially pay more for a service they're receiving for their extreme health conditions. That's how insane this is. And for them to argue, this article is about cutting Brexit bureaucracy, I don't know if this is the Telegraph actually being comedians here, because this is red tape created by the British government. Huge red tape, huge bureaucracy to get this done. So this is just crazy to me that this article is about cutting bureaucracy when the first few paragraphs are about creating more bureaucracy and more paperwork. We are really hoping, because we have a long-standing relationship with these suppliers, we'll be able to manage that. At the very least, she faces more paperwork and at worst, being cut off from vital suppliers. So let's break those two down. More paperwork means more costs, especially for what she is most likely a small business. It's not great. And if she's cut off from her supplier, what's she supposed to do? What is she supposed to do at that point? I doubt there's anywhere else in the world she can buy this stuff from. If there is, she's probably looking at them thinking, they have a bit of a monopoly here, so they can actually charge her a lot more. Crazy stuff. Prior to the referendum, deregulation was cited as a key reason to leave. the Block Jones situation was not one that businesses expect to find them in 2 years after leaving the EU and 1 year after the close of the transition period. Now, the Telegraph could be doing this to set up their framing for the equivalency kind of arrangement, the unilateral one for the UK. That could be potentially what they're doing here, but this in itself is a huge self-own for Brexit Britain. But there are hopes to shift independence. The shift to independence might finally provide the impetus to cut red tape, which is ironic because the UKCA mark would create endless red tape. This red tape has only grown over the last 40 years. Gee, it's almost like governments are trying to protect workers and consumers. In 2016, Johnson objected to, and this is his quote by the way, which is unverified because it's most likely not true, but we'll break this down. The torrent of EU legislation coming at a rate of 2,500 a year, which I don't think is true, but okay, and imposing costs of £600 million per week on businesses. Now, this was said in 2016, okay. So, question: how many businesses are there in the UK? 5.6 million private sector businesses, okay. So if we have a look, right, so he's talked about 600 million, right? That's 600 million there, right? So we divide this by 6 million, £107 per week. That's how much it's costing. £107 per week for British businesses. A year, it costs them £5,000, which is a lot. Okay, it's a lot, but considering what we get out of these regulations, it does help businesses a fair bit, because otherwise you create a race to the bottom and you have other problems. But £5,000 for a business, not a lot, really. £107 a week, not really a ton, is it? It's not they give you these big numbers, right? These huge numbers of £600 million per week, right? But when you break it down, it's not worth a lot. Classic Tory trick there. The Conservatives' 2019 manifesto promised to ensure that regulations... Actually, do you know what? One final point on this. Given that Brexit has happened and all this nonsense, this article talks a lot about how Britain hasn't actually cut these regulations. So it does tell you how important these regulations are, considering if they weren't so important, the UK would have cut them. And this article further goes on to talk about how the UK has actually added way more regulation under Johnson, despite Brexit. So the Tory manifesto promised to ensure that regulation is sensible and proportionate, and that we always consider the needs for small businesses when devising rules. Yeah, you haven't though, because farmers and fishermen, which are relatively small businesses, you haven't helped them at all, have you? Also manufacturers as well, small scale manufacturers especially. People like Caroline, have you thought about someone like her who buys these products? Evidently not. In 2020, this is hilarious, bosses cited over-regulation as the top threat for company growth, according to PwC's global CEO survey. Okay, so you asked a bunch of CEOs, right, whose main goal is profit over everything. What's the main problem impacting your business? They're going to say regulations. Why? Because they can't look at themselves and say it's our fault, because that's how they get fired. If your CEO is like, oh, I'm not doing a great job in the first quarter, but I picked up in the second. Like, the whole point of a CEO is meant to maximize profits. So this thing they're saying, oh, it's over-regulations that are impacting our businesses. Obviously, they're going to say that. What do you expect them to say? So stupid. It was last year, 2 in 5 UK bosses said regulations was having a negative impact in an Institute of Directors survey. So these bosses, 2 in 5. What's that, 4 in 10? That's not even half. And of course they're going to blame regulations for their lack of growth. Who else are they going to blame? Themselves. They're not going to blame like manufacturers or their supply chain, because that's how you annoy people. So what they're going to blame? The government and over regulations. But you should ask them, which ones would you cut and why? While Johnson has said he wants to cut £1 billion of old EU red tape, that target is dwarfed by the pile of regulations the country's added in recent years. Jones' case is one of them, which is sad, because the Jones case, the one they cited at the start, isn't because of EU regulation or even just UK regulation. It's a product of Brexit. Victoria Hewson, the Institute of Economic Affairs, it seemed like a fairly right-wing think tank, says accepting the CE mark products will show Britain is serious about supporting businesses and customers. The UK has an opportunity to lead the world with a radical trade policy of recognizing regulations without requiring reciprocity with the EU. And the problem is you lose a massive bargaining chip in trade negotiations if you do this. That's why other countries don't do it. That's why this is dumb. But we're so reliant on the EU for imports from them that we're going to do this. A BEIS spokesman said, having our own regulatory regime gives us the opportunity to make our product regulations work in the best interests of UK consumers and businesses, which is ironic because in this article later on, they actually talk about how the UK structured EU law to actually help UK businesses and consumers. Crazy, especially when Brexit in itself has made it more expensive for UK businesses and consumers. So this argument of giving our own regulatory regime, that's fine. But the problem is the more you deregulate, the worse it's going to become for exports. And the simple fact is imports are struggling as well because we're doing import checks now. Because we go to most favourable nations rules. Because we're out of the EU. We're out of the single market. We're out of the customs union. Labelling is just one item of regulation on the mountain of regulation, and quantifying that proves difficult because in this paragraph they actually do explain the problems with trying to quantify the impact of regulations. The cost it creates for the UK economy could be seen as £220 billion, according to a 2020 research by the IEA. And the problem with their analysis is this. Its estimate is extrapolated from an official gauge from 2005 that puts it at around 10 to 12% of GDP. So what they've done is they've looked at officials in 2005 saying, oh yeah, regulations, it's it costs about 10 to 12% of GDP. And then they've said, all right, so in 2020, our economy was this, our GDP was this. So that means if we extrapolate the numbers, it costs to the UK economy 220 billion, which is a really dumb metric to use because it's very hard to say if that's actually true. You looked at a figure from 2005 and said, well, if that figure does hold true, then it must be this today, which is simply weird. It's not good analysis. It's really poor, to be honest. I don't really do statistics. I'm not very good at math. But if there is anyone in the comments, which usually there is, you let me know what you think about that. And does not account for the benefits of rules indicating how difficult it is to measure accurately. Because, right, if you're a manufacturer and you're buying products from the EU because you're going to put it together in whichever country you're in, right, you want to make sure wherever you're putting into, say, a car, right, say you buy engines from, I don't know, Honda. We'll make this up, okay? So you buy an engine from Honda, you buy the chips from Arm. I think Arm do manufacture chips and things like that, right? You put the car together and the engine don't work because there's no regulator. There's no standard to what an engine really has to be. And so you had an agreement with an engine manufacturer, and then they change the parts on it without telling you. There's no regulator to really stop them, and then boom, you sell the car. Person drives out of the car lot. Boom, engine blows up. This is why you have things like CE marks, because you want to make sure whatever products you're buying, especially if you're putting it into a bigger product, you want it to work. If the power supply I have in my computer, if that thing blows up, it can take the whole computer with it. So you want to buy a good standard power supply, because you don't want to tank the rest of your computer, which is full of more expensive parts. That's why you have things like CE marks. Why? Because I want to make sure the product I am buying to put into my computer works properly. That's why these marks exist. So imagine the cost to the country's GDP if we just made products that didn't work because the smaller components weren't up to scratch, essentially. They weren't regulated properly and things go wrong. Imagine. So you can't quantify the benefits and kind of the pros and cons of regulations. It's very hard to do so, especially when it comes to things like regulatory standards. There are clearly opportunities to get chopping. Okay, let's hear them. Last year, the Prime Minister appointed former Conservative leader Ian Duncan-Smith, enough said, to chair the task force on innovation, growth and regulatory reform in order drawing up a plan to trim regulations. Think tanks have produced reams of rules that could be usefully cut. I mean, have they though? Like, the only ones that I've seen are rubbish. This one here is a load of tosh. These ones here, a load of rubbish, right? The city could be freed from the stringent MIFID2 rules that hurt analysis research. So I actually clicked on this. I couldn't find this stuff here. Again, it's above my pay grade sort of thing, which is that it basically was meant to force companies to be more honest So in 2018, EU reforms of the financial markets, known by not the most catchy name MIFID2, was some of the most far-reaching and ever conceived, and yet, like so many Brussels regulations, it had a problem. The actual outcome turned out to be precisely the opposite of what was intended. One of the big reforms was to prevent brokers bundling up analyst research in general service. Instead, it had to be charged for separately. In theory, that was meant to make it more straightforward and stop analysts pumping up shares on behalf of the bank they worked for. Instead, all it has done is reduce the amount of research available because they can't bundle up the research, so they just stop doing it. That's what the impression I get here. And so this is one of the things. So they're talking about, oh yeah, if you cut this regulation, it's going to help the city out. Brexit has done tons of damage to the City of London to the point where the EU are going to cut us out. I need to cover this video at some point, cover this at some point, be soon. No EU access for UK clearinghouses after 2025. So the thing is, right, if you start deregulating in these areas, it might not make the biggest differences to financial services. It will help investors and stuff, sure, but Brexit has cut us off from, a large market in the EU. So, yeah, you might be able to kind of mitigate some of the damage, but you're not going to get rid of all of it from Brexit. Solvency 2, I mean, this one's ridiculous. Laws that hold back investment by forcing insurers to hold large sums of money on balance sheets. So this is to do with like insurance companies and things like that. Riddle me this, guys and gals in the audience. If an insurance claim goes through, right, say a trade goes badly or whatever, and you have to claim insurance or whatever else, right? If that insurance company or that bank or whoever doesn't have enough money in liquid assets, right, to resolve the claim, what happens then? What happens when you've got massive trades that, collapse because one side has to pull out or something bad happens? What happens in that scenario? You get mass bankruptcies and you get huge problems. Solvency 2, again, I couldn't tell you about the specifics of it because I'm not that well versed in this stuff, but genuinely to me seems like a good thing. And ineffective banker bonus caps, which I think the UK actually has a lot of control over, a lot more control than we claim anyways. And you need bankers' bonus caps. Why? Because these guys and gals in banking are so kind of incentive driven that they'll make risky bets which will cause massive problems. See 2007, 2008 financial crash if you want more evidence of that. Without bankers' bonus caps, right? What you're going to see is more casino capitalist bets which don't pay off. In tech, the long reach of GDPR rules could be pruned, which again, we have equivalency on data with the EU. So if you start cutting GDPR rules, the EU could kick us out of that equivalency agreement, which again will negatively impact British businesses. Pharma regulations could be scaled back as the UK strives to become a global life sciences hub. And again, the UK wants to stay as part of Horizon. I don't think the EU would look too favourably if we start cutting pharma regulations and other things like that. And not to mention, it will make it harder for us to export medicines into Northern Ireland and other places if we start cutting regulations on pharmaceuticals. More climate-friendly and nutritious food could be grown by relaxing EU constraints on gene editing and boosting innovation. Again, gene editing, not great. It can cause problems. There's a reason why, probably for good reason, the EU have outlawed this. A joke. Revamping the Novel Food Act to help startups such as those for meatless products. And again, this stuff, novel foods, it's another very strange one. Novel foods are foods which have not been widely consumed by people in the UK or the EU before May 1997. This means that foods don't have a history of consumption. Examples of novel foods include new foods, for example, phytosterols, I'm not sure what that is, used in cholesterol reducing spreads. I'm assuming some sort of margarine, maybe. Traditional foods eaten elsewhere in the world, for example, chia seeds, which are quite good for you, and baobab. Food produced from new processes, for example, bread treated with ultraviolet light, and things like impossible meat and all that kind of stuff. And again, what do you get out of this? You're going to lower the rules on this, like revamping the Novel Food Act to help startups. Like, what? It doesn't make sense. Like, what do you like? They give out these broad statements again, right? And what specifically do you want the UK to do about them? What specifically do you want the Tories to do about it? That's what I don't get. Yet, despite the opportunity and intermittent enthusiasm, those backing reforms say progress has been very slow. Shock. The government has done absolutely sweet FA since We delivered the report to them in June 21, said Sir Ian, lamenting that Frost was given too little authority to make progress when in government, which I don't know if that's true, because part of Frost's remit was meant to look at EU rules, which didn't happen, was meant to look at cutting regulations where possible, but he spent so much time saber-rattling with the EU that he didn't get anything done, which may be a good thing for the UK, really. They should also have been getting on with it, and still have not a single element of deregulation since I produced that report, Ian Duncan Smith. And this is where you realise that these kind of campaigns, right, are a massive joke. You've got Tony Blair introducing the Better Regulations Task Force, things like that, which are meant to be designed to cut regulations, which, again, didn't really do a lot. You know, the coalition tried the same thing, a 2 in, 2 out, 3 in, 3 out cable. Said there were a lot of silly things hanging around from the 19th century. So now we're looking at, talking about cutting rules from the 1800s, really, which they tried to get rid of. Major roadblocks remained. Certain key departments didn't believe in it, like the Home Office. The Home Office is an ironic one because, by making it harder for people to come to the UK, refugees, you have to add more and more regulations, which is more red tape, more bureaucracy. Again, these people make no sense. Since we had proliferating regulation in the Home Office with more and more red tape, he said, and what happens when you do this one in, one out thing, and the Home Office want to add new rules? Where do you get rid of rules then? In that case, the Home Office have said, no, we ain't getting rid of no rules. So where else are you going to look? So Vince adds that the Treasury also demanded regulation around tax evasion and avoidance, as well as banking regulation brought in during the financial crisis. Which, again, where do you cut the rules then if you do a 2 in, 2 out thing? Where are you going to cut it from? Water? Rivers? What are you doing? Similarly, the EU rules could not be scrapped, and in many cases, this right is the second self-owned in this article, was designed by British officials to suit UK companies. So we want to cut all this regulation and bureaucracy that Britain helped to design. One of the 3 big players in the EU, let's not forget here, Britain, France and Germany. These regulations were created by British officials to suit UK companies. How ironic is that? How ironic is this paragraph here? That's going in the thumbnail. In 2015, the government sought to cut a net 10 billion of regulatory costs over the Parliament under Dave. 1 year later, the National Audit Office report found 0.9 billion pounds of costs were cut from qualifying regulation. That's great. You've cut nearly 1 billion pounds worth, right? You notice how they put 0.9 billion to make it seem bigger when it's really 900 million, okay? While 8.3 billion of costs were added by rules outside the target scope. David Cameron trying to cut, regulatory burdens, but adding, on net, what's that, about 7.4 billion? So he failed in his goals because maybe regulations and bureaucracy aren't always a bad thing. Now, on top of that, COVID and climate change require even more regulations. How dare they? Me. While ministers have pledged not to address the business regulatory costs, the Regulatory Policy Committee estimates Johnson's administration has added 5.6 billion in the first year after the 2019 election. So, that doesn't even take into account, right, all of the new import and export checks and the costs they have. Because I think HMRC, the cost, we've covered it before, I think the import system alone is like 13 billion or 30 billion? I can't remember the exact number, but it was higher than our EU membership costs. That just import checks alone. Crazy. Whitehall may look disparagingly at Britain's graveyard of previous red tape campaigns, but they can take inspiration from a successful drive almost 5,000 miles west. And this is the thing, right? I actually looked at this and I couldn't figure out what the hell they were talking about when it came to British Columbia in Canada. Apparently it was doing bad in the 2000s, then they cut loads of regulations, now they're doing good. Advocates of this model include Mike Cherry at the Federation of Small Businesses, which says this helped the province's growth jump above the Canadian average while maintaining high health and environmental standards. Now, I couldn't tell you the specifics of British Columbia. So yeah, I mean, I'm no expert on British Columbia, but what I can tell you is this. British Columbia GDP, okay, in 2019 was 258,447. The next second one to that was Saskatchewan, which was 69,000. It's a big, okay, it's a lot. When you look at per capita, it's actually lower. So British Columbia's GDP per capita is lower than Saskatchewan, and it's not that much higher than uh, Manitoba or Nova Scotia. It's not a ton higher. So they're citing the example of British Columbia, which doesn't look like it's even doing that great comparatively, anyways. Which is just ridiculous, especially when British Columbia is very resource rich. Geography severely limits agricultural production, but they're known for forestry. So with fluctuating importance in mining, farming, and natural gas, about 60% of British Columbia is forested, accounting for almost 20% of the forested land in Canada. So I suppose they've got like lots of natural resources, which will help them against other Canadian areas. But I couldn't find anything that kind of makes it look outstanding. The numbers for British Columbia, where are you gone? Aren't that impressive, to be honest. Sorry about the background noise, nothing I can do about it. So the new Brexit minister has raised the prospect of showing flexibility on CE marks. And again, he talks about how barriers are delight of protectionists and blah, 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 blah. But the simple fact is, by us giving regulatory kind of equivalency to the EU that's unilateral, it's just going to help the EU and not us. So I mean, it's going to help manufacturers and consumers in the UK, but it's going to damage exports, because then you're going to have to prove not only rules of origins and customs, but you're also going to have to prove your goods are up to EU standards, which is another huge barrier for companies to go through. Even the Treasury is understood to be gearing up for financial services reform, and this is why, right, going back to this article, this is why people like McGuinness and other members in the EU actually want to get rid of the EU's reliance on London's UK clearing houses, because they can't regulate what the UK does with regards to financial services. And so the more the UK deregulates in this area, the more kind of risky things become in the UK to do investments. And therefore, the key reason that really is one of the key reasons why the EU wants to take financial services out of the UK and do more trading in the EU, where they have regulatory supervision. That's the key reason. And now we've got our boy Matt Hancock, Mr. Lover Lover, the former health secretary, making a very nonsensical cameo in this one, saying we've learned lessons through the pandemic, how even in highly regulated areas like healthcare, you can flex those regulations. Imagine, right, we could actually kind of avoid certain pieces of regulations because we're in a goddamn emergency, saying you can flex through those regulations to improve people's lives, as we did in the clinical trials for vaccines and treatments, meaning the UK was the first to develop these in the world. So, I did a bit of time travel, looking back on the old Google. So, was the AstraZeneca vaccine the first one created? I believe so, but there is some irony here. So, at the time, November 2020, there were a number of COVID vaccine candidates being tested in large phase 3 clinical trials. Among the jabs being considered was the AstraZeneca one. Okay, Pfizer-BioNTech also announced the effectiveness of their jabs this month. So that was in December 8th, right? So literally within less than a month of the UK's one being considered, the Pfizer one was being considered as well. And I believe the Pfizer one's actually better than the AstraZeneca one, especially when they weren't giving the AstraZeneca one to people below a certain age. They were giving us the Moderna one, the Pfizer one. They weren't giving us the British one. And then, right, here comes the big irony, which is the UK became the first Western country to license a vaccine against COVID, with the first jab approved was the Pfizer-BioNTech one. BioNTech, which were based in Germany, which is an EU member. Crazy. Mind equals blown. I can't believe it. An EU member state actually got to the punch before us. We regulated a goddamn foreign vaccine before ours. Can you believe that? That an EU member state, right, managed to get their vaccine authorised in the UK before the UK managed it, despite all their red tape and bureaucracy and hurdles and all this and that and all this other lies. One was authorised before the British one, despite us skirting all these regulations, which no doubt the Pfizer one probably did, because there would have been emergency use cases for it. And, this argument that, because of Brexit we can get rid of all these burdensome rules simply does not make sense. Why? Because we were part of the EU when we authorised the vaccine. We were part of the EU when we made it. We're part of Horizon, which probably played a key part in this. A massive EU scheme to get scientists from around the EU to work together, which we don't really have access to anymore. God, these people. Stephen Gibson, head of the RPC, says a red tape drive should not be about whether we have too much or too little regulation, but whether the regulations are still fit for purpose. I mean, Stephen Gibson might be one of the best contributors in this article, which is a very low bar, because he's right. You should be looking at, are these regulations still fit for purpose, not, we put in 3 new ones, we need to get rid of 3. It makes no sense. Back in South Lancashire, Jones said just wants to avoid any unnecessary extra burdens. Well, I've got news for you, Chief. The only way we're going to avoid this is if we go through Jacob Rees-Mogg's crazy idea of equivalency for EU goods, essentially, unilateral equivalency, or we rejoin the single market and customs union, or you find a new supplier, which you're not going to be able to do. So I'm really sorry for this lady. I am genuinely sorry for Miss Caroline Jones, because she gives a vital service to people, and the simple fact is Brexit is the thing that has damaged her business. Of course, she says, if there is a better way, we are open to it. She says, at the moment, I don't feel particularly optimistic. I mean, her only other option is she, sets up shop in the EU. That's it. There's not many good options for her because of this government. So this article, and I don't know if the Telegraph have done these cell phones on purpose, but it's just crazy that they've written an article about the burdensome red tape that Britain can begin cutting, and then they begin specifically, right, on an article which really, the first few paragraphs of this really actually show that Brexit is bad and the UKCA mark is bad, because it's going to create massive problems for this lady specifically, and other people, no doubt. So I don't know what the Telegraph's endgame is. Are they saying Brexit is bad, or are they for this, crazy Rees-Mogg unilateral equivalency agreement? I don't know. It's very strange, but you've got 2 massive cell phones in this one article. But yeah, I've got nothing more to say on this one. If you're an expert in British Columbia and their economic growth and all that nonsense, let me know. If you know anything about novel foods, let me know. But or anything else specific to this article. But don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe, support the channel on Patreon, and I'll see you in the next one.